Reflections and refractions simulate the bouncing of light through a scene, and they add to the realism of a scene. So let's take a look at how to create reflections and refractions in MentalRay. Now, by default, reflections are turned on in MentalRay. So here I have a simple scene, and if we render it, you'll see that I get reflections. So I have the reflections of the clouds here, the reflections of the buildings in the other objects. So these are just standard types of reflections, and they do add some realism to this scene. Now, if I want more control over how things reflect, I can do it in one of two places. The first is the Render Settings menu, and this is kind of a global setting. So if I go down to my Quality tab here, I can set my overall quality, but what I really need to do is look at what's called trace depth. Now, MentalRay is what we call a ray tracer. So what it does is it bounces light through the scene. So we need to tell MentalRay how many bounces we can have. And the more bounces, the more rendering time. So it's always a balance. So if I went to trace depth and I turned reflection to 0 and did a render pass, you would get a completely different effect. Here I have reflections at 0, and you can see that, well, there are no reflections. I'm going to keep this image here. Let's turn it up to about 6. Now what that means is that the light can bounce up to 6 times in the scene and bounce off of 6 objects. So this gives us a much more realistic render, as you can see. So here we have the render with 6 reflections, and here we have it with 0. So you notice how we have a very different effect when we add reflections. Now, reflections can also be controlled at the material level. So each individual material has its own reflectivity control. So let's go ahead and select the body of this building. If we go into the attribute editor, you'll notice that it has a material applied to it called reflective. And if I scroll down through my attributes, you'll see that I have ray trace options. And down here, I have my reflection limits as well as my reflection specularity. So again, I can turn up or down how many reflections I have. And another important attribute is called reflectivity. I can turn that up or down. So how much of the surface is showing the reflections versus the diffuse. So if I turn this, say, down to, say, 0.25 and do a render, it looks like this. So here I have it at 0.5, 0.25. So let's go ahead and turn this way up. Let's turn it up to, say, 0.9. Give it a very high value. So here I have 0.9, 0.25, and 0.5. So you can see how when I turn up the reflectivity, it brightens the scene because it's reflecting more light. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this down just a little bit here to about 0.6 or so. And then let's take a look at refractions. Refractions are the other side of ray tracing. While reflections are the light that bounce off of objects, refractions are the light that passes through. So here I have this transparent dome, and it has a material named glassy on it. And if I scroll down to refractions, well, they're not turned on. So refractions allow light to pass through and create kind of a lens effect. Now, we looked at this a little bit before, but let's take another look at this. We have a couple of values here. We have the refractive index, the refraction limit. Now, this is the number of rays that can bounce. We also have light absorbance. How much does this surface absorb light? How thick is the surface? And then how does it attenuate shadows? So I'm going to go ahead and turn the refractive index below 1. So below 1 makes it more of a convex lens, which is kind of what we want for this. And then let's go ahead and render this. So as you can see, we're getting a much different effect. So this is it before, and this is after. So this is what it looked like with refractions and without. So you get a much more realistic glass type effect. Now I can turn this up or down. In fact, I'm going to turn this up to, say, 0.97. You don't really need that much refraction to get the effect that you want. And let's play with light absorbance and surface thickness. So I'm going to turn up light absorbance just a little bit and give it a surface thickness of about 0.3 or 0.4. So I'm just adding a little bit of thickness to the surface. And then we can also increase our reflection limit. So how much are we reflecting? So let's do one more render. So as you can see, this is a lower refractive value. This is 0.95. This is 0.97, but also with a thicker surface. So you can see that that's a little bit more realistic, probably a little more what we want. But as you can see, we've got a lot of different values that we can play with. We can control reflectivity as a master control in the render settings window, but probably the best way to control it is on a per material basis, which is what I'm doing here.